Well, hello once again, all my vintage dirt bike YouTubers, and thanks to everyone again for retuning to my classic dirt bike TV channel, and of course a very special hello to any of the brand new subscribers who have just recently signed up to watch my video content. Now, in terms of returning to racing after the pandemic, it looks like most of the clubs in the UK now are beginning to post their dates for 2021, so things are looking a bit brighter now, and it looks like my first ever race event in over a year will now be held at the Scottish Twin Shock Scramble Club's event at Pound Mill on the 30th of May. So that will be my first event in over a year. Of course, soon after that I will be posting some of the racing footage and of course some of the nice machines. But in the meantime, we're going to take a look at a bike that was always regarded as a big man's bike, and these things could only be ridden by riders who had big cojones, as they say. But we're going to take a look now at a very nice KX500 Kawasaki that belonged to Raymond Thomson. Yes, thanks for joining me once again as we check out this nice 1988 KX500 Kawasaki, which, as I mentioned, belonged to our Arbroath rider Raymond Thomson. And this particular bike was just one of the many machines from Raymond's substantial old collection of classic racers. Now, these big bore two-stroke Kawasaki's were made from, I think it was about 1983 until about 2004, and of course Kawasaki designed these big 500s in order to take on the big bore bikes that its competition of Honda, Suzuki and Yamaha were producing at that time, as of course the big bike open motocross class was where it was at in the 1980s, and this big quacker was just an absolute brute of a bike. Now, earlier KX500s had of course the air-cooled engines, although from 1985 Kawasaki introduced water cooling on these big open class 500 machines. Now, the chassis was made up of a steel frame with a bolt-on alloy subframe at the rear, because these of course were the days before Kawasaki were using all aluminium frames on their motocross race bikes. But back in 1988, if you were a decent enough rider and you liked masses of power on your open class race bikes, then these big KX500 had all the grunt that you're ever likely to need, with of course plenty in reserve. Now, if my memory is still intact, as I remember, these big KX500s put out around 65 or 66 horsepower, which wasn't too bad for a single cylinder two-stroke racer, and it was probably more than your average rider could ever handle, to be fair. But the heart of the big quacker was this awesome 500cc water-cooled power plant that had a bore and stroke of 86 millimeters. It was also fitted with Kawasaki's KIPS power valve system, or Kawasaki Integrated Power Valve System, if you want to give it its full title. Now, the motor was also fitted with CDI electronic ignition, and it had a 5-speed gearbox and of course your standard oil-cooled multi-plate clutch. Now, also, as I remember, I think these motors had an automatic decompressor fitted just to help you kickstart that big motor into life. And the fuel was also fed to the cylinder by a key-in carburetor and reed valve block. But these were pretty awesome 500 engines, and of course they were very reliable. And if you could have held the throttle wide open in one of these bikes in top gear, then you were a very special person indeed, because it took a certain kind of rider to get the most from these big 500s. Now, the exhaust on these bikes of course was by the way of your two-stroke expansion chamber, And this particular part on Raymond's bike's not the original from 1988, but it's another very high quality upgrade from Pro Circuit Racing from California in the USA. Now, Pro Circuit make these top quality items for a multitude of different two-stroke and four-stroke motocrossers, and you'd be quite hard pressed to find a better exhaust system than these pipes to fit to your bike. Now, the rear alloy tailpipe is again part of the Pro Circuit system, and there's a very nice brap from this rear pipe when that big KX500 gets fired up into life. Now, once again, as I remember, these 88 KX500s had a set of 43mm cartridge type forks as standard, which were decent enough for a big 500 open class racer, and there was some scope also for making adjustments to the bike's rebound and damping. Now, disc brakes, as you'd expect for 1988, and Ray's also added this disc cover to try and protect the caliper and disc from damage, although the downside of fitting these kind of parts was that it also trapped mud and other debris if the racetrack was particularly muddy, and it could actually hinder the brakes operation if stones etc. got trapped between the caliper and the disc. Now, naturally, on a bike like this, you could fit whichever rear shock you liked to these Evolution bikes, and our featured machine is fitted with an HM Racing suspension shock, built by, of course, HM Racing in Edinburgh in Kent in the UK. Now, once again, another very high quality item, and depending on what make and model of shock you opted for, you still had a decent amount of travel at the rear end to soak up those big bumps, even on the roughest of racetracks. Now, once again, as you'd expect, these 88 KX500s were fitted with Kawasaki's revolutionary Unitrack rear suspension system, which was, of course, ably assisted in its development by American racing legend Brad Lackey, who helped Kawasaki to improve this type of rear linkage suspension system when he rode for the Japanese company in the late 1970s and early 1980s. But another nice piece of hardware fitted to this bike is this rear alloy brake master cylinder guard made by Works Connection. But as I mentioned earlier, it's a very brave man who can hold this throttle fully open when that big KX is in top gear and singing in the red line. Now, the late 1980s was, of course, the time when manufacturers began fitting these long seats to their motocross machines that crept up the rear of the fuel tank. This was so that the riders could make full use of the machine's geometry by shifting their weight onto the front, just to help the bike turn into those tight corners. But without a doubt, this is a truly awesome open class racer, and if you think you could handle the horses that were served up by the power delivery from that 500 two-stroke motor at full pelt, then you were certainly in a different league from your average motocross racer. But just like every other thoroughbred racehorse, of course, you just had to give her head and then hang on for dear life if you wanted to stand on the top step of that winner's podium. Okay, we've had a quick look at the bike. Let's see if Raymond can now fire her up, and we'll all have a quick listen to what she sounds like. Now, it was a bit windy on the day, so the audio is not the best, unfortunately. And so, as I said, it was extremely windy on the day, and it certainly played havoc with the audio recording, but I do hope you still enjoyed having a quick listen to the bike all the same. Well, I hope you enjoyed that quite brief look around Raymond Thomson's KX500 Kawasaki machine. These bikes were very fast motocrossers back in the day, and these were not for the faint of heart, and it wasn't every rider that could actually get the best out of those big 500 two-strokers. Okay, coming up in my next video, we're going classic racing once again, and this time we're going to take a look at some racing footage from the Scottish Classics Lockerbie race event in 2016. So I do hope you'll join me for that, up until, of course, we get back out on the racing paddock once again in 2021. And don't forget, my first race event will be on the 30th of May. So until then, everybody, of course, continue to be safe and well, and we'll all get together once again to talk about more vintage iron right here on your favourite Classic Dirt Bike TV channel.